Great. Let's begin. This is our API security authorization themed panel discussion. I thought perhaps we could first go through and please introduce yourself, a little bit about your background with API security. You want to start, Jacob?
Sure. Jacob Ideskog. I work at Curity. We do identity and access management for APIs. A lot of OAuth, a lot of OpenID. I have a developer background, started all the way in embedded software, moved into protocols, moved into security, and been doing that since I found that. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
I'm Anders. Similar background, development, identity. I used to work for Curity on the identity side for a few years, and for the last 5 years or so, I've been mainly involved in the Open Policy Agent project and solving authorization.
Good morning, everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, good. Hey, everyone. I'm Dan Barahona. And thanks, Bill, for putting the younger, thinner picture of it. That's actually me. I know it doesn't look like me. I'm one of the founders of APISec Unversity. We've got a booth upstairs. Come take a look. It's a site we launched 2 years ago to provide free security courses on keeping your APIs free from breaches and the like. It's been super popular, or close to 100,000 students enrolled, so come check it out. But it's definitely given me a chance to learn a lot about the security space. Hopefully you can share some insights today.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive in. I'm curious first just to talk a little bit generally about API security. We keep seeing reports coming out there from vendors and analysts about just the rise in API attacks out there. A couple years ago, Gartner predicted that API attacks would become the most common attack vector in enterprise applications. And it seems like that's starting to unfold. So could you give us an overview of why you think this is happening? Why are we seeing a rise in API-driven attacks? Let's just start from the left.
Yeah, okay. I think a lot of the APIs that we build and expose today started earlier on. And perhaps they started as internal APIs, internal projects. They were never intended to do other things, and they grow. So we have those as part of our platform, and then we're doing these new things next to it, and then all of a sudden we need to create this posture around it, the security posture around it. And security, I don't know if anyone heard my talk yesterday, but it's a bit of defense in depth. So, I mean, there's many places you need to think of these things, and if you don't think of it from the bottom up, it's really hard, which makes them a great vector for attacks.
I agreed, and I think ultimately, I think it is because access control is quite hard to do right, and even harder to do right at a distributed scale. And of course, most of these applications that we're working with are not just something we started out like a greenfield development, but we always seem to, or we always need to cater to these kind of old legacy systems and so on and so forth. So it's quite common to see having apps written in several different languages, using frameworks and all sorts of versions and so on. So it's a really diverse landscape, even in smaller organizations can be quite complex. Like how do you do something? How do you solve identity and access control there? That is, and who should do it? Who's responsible? There's really no, you can have an identity team or so, but at least when you start moving out to authorization, that's traditionally been very hard to just kind of offload to one team and have them because it's often kind of tightly coupled to the logic of the applications. So it's that is. And if everybody is supposed to do it, that's another challenge, because then everybody's going to do it in their own way. And that's going to be, that's probably not going to end up very good either.
Yeah, so a combination of bad inventory management, lack of design practices and awareness, and legacy technical debt combining here. Dan, any other thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the big reasons is APIs have kind of transformed how we build our applications, right? We've got the front end. They now communicate through APIs to all this back-end data and functionality and so forth. And historically, we've focused a lot of security on the front end, right? We do our web scanning. And the front end really is kind of a super controlled environment, right? I can only see what you present to me. I can only click the buttons that are available to me. But what we find at the API layer is a very uncontrolled environment, right? It's just a command line, right? Mm-hmm. And I can write any request I want and send it, right? And we're relying on the back end to know whether it's legitimate, it's malicious, what do we do with it, right? And for better or for worse, we've kind of relied on the UI as a Band-Aid to control things that we don't want people to do. But once we see attackers go around that UI and hit the API directly, it's kind of wide open, right? And so I think that's creating a very ripe environment for attacks to happen. Attackers are finding a lot of flaws, logic issues, authorization gaps at the API layer. And if you look at kind of the role of security, a lot of security teams, I'm not at a security conference, I can say, don't really understand APIs, right? And they want to plug it, put a video camera on or something like that. But a lot of times the security has to be embedded into the DNA of the application itself. And that means we need dev teams and operators and folks in this room to take on more of that
really
role.
Understand.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, do you usually see AppSec people, security people in the role of API security, or is it really often coming down to developers implementing this?
This is, I think, a big problem, right? Like I talk to security teams and they'll say, we don't even know what APIs we have, right? We got to go find all our APIs, which fair enough, right? But I've never talked to a VP of engineering who says, I don't know what APIs we got, right? So security and dev are not communicating and collaborating as effectively as they need to. And if we're going to keep API secure, we need that collaboration to happen.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'd like to kind of just talk about the different vulnerabilities present with APIs out there. I know a couple of speakers, including myself, showed that list of the top OWASP threats out there. Are there any commonalities across the API landscape in terms of common attack vulnerabilities that are often attacked in APIs?
I mean, first of all, I think access, like Anders was saying, access control is really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you have this little API doing two things, and you keep adding things, and it's growing up, becoming more, and all of a sudden it's 3 and 5 and 10. And the point of good access control is you can't really do it until you're at the point where you know everything. So you know who's making the call, what exactly are they trying to do, the context of it, what time of day is it, things that matter. You don't know that until you're at that point, which means you have to kind of design for it already from the beginning. And it's very easy if you're doing this on your own to miss one of those parameters. And a good attacker, I mean, they try that. So. Right. So the BOLA, I mean, these type of things, that's why we see that, because it is really hard. And obviously that's in the top of the list, what we see. But I think we'll also see these other attacks that I was talking about yesterday a bit more, that the misuse of credentials to get in, which is also sort of an authorization attack, because you take over access from someone else. But
definitely, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like on this topic, on like the security team or this developer do it, that contributes to why there are so many vulnerabilities, and because pretty much no one wants to do authentication. We're all very happy to leave that to another team. Like nobody desires to build their own like authentication engine unless you're one of us. But developers normally don't want to build authentication. They're very happy to. But when you go out and you talk to developers at all these companies, they all want to build authorization, despite like not really. Like they don't really know what it is, but they're like confident that they can build something good, which normally they can't. And that is, I think, contributes to that, because because it means we just have so many homegrown authorization solutions out there, And but it's interesting. And often when you say like, here's something, we're here to replace this with something more like unified or something that can kind of could work across the whole organization. It's often met with resistance, like what's wrong with this, what we have, or so on, which is really interesting. So it's just as much a people problem as it is a technical problem.
Interesting. Yeah,
I'll just add, just the fact that OWASP came out with an API-specific top 10 in 2019 reflects that there's some unique differences to how APIs get attacked versus our web apps. They updated that OWASP list in 2023, and two things didn't change. OWASP number 1, broken authorization. OWASP number 2, broken authentication, right? Lots of other things changed. So those still are the top issues that we find. And the third one I might throw out there is excess data exposure. All right. I'll give a quick example. There's a payment platform in the US, very popular. They had a feature on the homepage that would show anonymized transactions, just to show how active and vibrant the platform was. But when you called that API directly, it did not return anonymized data, it returned the whole record, right? First name, last name, account, everything, right? And so, we have to, like, as developers, we have to start thinking about it and be, appreciate, like, they could have made an API that only returned the minimum amount of information, right? But instead, they're like, here's the whole record, and developers, keep what you want, throw away the rest. Yeah. But of course, the attackers don't throw away anything, right? And they have all the time in the world and so forth. So, excess data exposure is definitely a big one.
Are you two also finding that APIs often expose way too much information, like needlessly?
I would say everything exposes way too much information because in security in general, I think confidence, I don't know if she's here, she had a great talk yesterday about the GraphQL introspection capability, and which is an awesome developer feature, but it is also an awesome map for an attacker to know what should I do with this API, what should I try, what can it do, and whatever in security, for instance, whenever we expose something, we also tell, the bad party something. If that's like, you try a password, how long does that take? If that takes different times, depending on if it's correct or if it's wrong, we're telling the attacker something. Maybe there was an account, but it was the wrong password, or maybe there was no account. But, so everything like this, you should always consider, what are we exposing here? What are we telling implicitly and explicitly the caller, because the caller is not necessarily going to be the one we think it is.
You could be leaking too much information in the error responses.
Definitely. Error responses, of course, definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think just looking into any random token, there's almost always an email address there. Yeah. And it's like none of these services are going to send emails. So why is that there in the first place? Where you could just have a UUID or some unique identifier for a user, and similarly with names and so on. It does make for perhaps a bit more convenience when you can find things easily in logs just by searching for a name or something like that. But no, there's definitely way too much information everywhere.
Yeah, and I think we put a bit of overconfidence on the perimeter as well, where you hit the gateway or the reverse proxy, and you do quite some advanced checks there on where you're supposed to go and token exchanges and all these things. But in the end of the day, like we were talking about before, the actual permission of the decision, if you're going to do operation 1 or not, it can't be done until you get to the API. So the gateway can never replicate that. You can't do it on the perimeter. You have to go all the way down, and then is it your account? Is it all these things? Should you be able to see the balance or whatever you're going to do? And then should you be able to list all these other accounts and blah blah blah? So which makes it hard because all the teams need to think about it. So it's really that people problem at that point.
Yeah. You mentioned we're sort of speaking to a room of developers and architects, not so much the security mindset. So are there any best practices that we can share with these people to help start thinking like that in the shift left, like design process earlier on, as opposed to like what you said, relying too much on the firewall later on? Like, how do we start to design with that mentality?
I'll jump in. First one is education. So obviously near and dear to my heart on APISec U. We do a lot of workshops for organizations, and if any of you are interested, come see me. We don't charge for them. They're free. We go through why APIs are under attack, real world breaches, best practices. But it turns out, and I'll talk about it in my session later today, there are hundreds, thousands of breaches, but when you look at what the common threads are, there's not that many, right? Authentication's one, authorization's another, data exposure is another. And so I've done these sessions for development teams where at the end of the session they'll say, I already know code I gotta fix, right? And so we don't need our developers to be security experts, but we need them to be security sensitive. Right? And if you see how APIs are being breached and attacked in the real world, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can take care of to dramatically improve your security. So I think education is always a great place to start, and we need developers to have a responsibility in that security.
Yep. That makes sense.
What was the question now again?
It's like, how can we encourage more of this thinking more at the design stage rather than relying too much on?
Yeah, no, I think I kind of touched on that before, but I think making security not a concern for the team, or obviously it should be a concern, but it's not a team level concern, but it's really an organizational concern. Doesn't mean it has to be like a security team or a team of security engineers, but it could just be a team of volunteers, like people who are interested in the topic of security that kind of get together and talk about it, because I feel like that is one of the worst problems to me, is like how everybody's trying to do this on their own. Right. Leading us to have like all these different solutions, and they're all like broken in their own unique ways. So I think that's gonna kind of shift the mindset to really see that this is something where this is an issue we should collaborate on.
So start talking, unify some standards, spread awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and to that, a lot of the security things you need to do are the same on a lot of your projects. So replication of and reuse of libraries and code that someone who does have that knowledge can do and can provide to all the APIs. Like, how do you terminate a job? Well, it's not that hard, but you need to do it right? And you need to know what you pass on and how to work with it. How do you authorize later on? Where do you authorize? There could be a few principles that you follow. Like, try to box it in a little bit. That will take you pretty far, I think. And then the other thing is testing. Like, obviously we need to test a lot of our own stuff. At Curity, we want all developers always to test their stuff, but then we also need someone else to do it. Like, you test your stuff because you know what it's supposed to do, but someone else tests it because they don't. Like, then they try it in a different way, right? And that's the key, I think, also not just for security, but for good stuff in general.
Yeah, I think testing is a really key one, and I think one of you guys mentioned like business logic and this kind of thing. Yeah. And by the way, Jacob made one of the courses on APISec U for authentication. It's a fantastic course, so I recommend you check that out. But a lot of times as developers and product owners, we think about how the app is meant to be used. Right? Does it work as designed? But what attackers are looking for is, how is it not meant to be used?
Those gaps, yeah.
Right? There's a lot of times there's a logic in there that, I can reset my password, but by the way, I can also brute force it because of the way it got implemented, and I can take over anybody's account. So we got to think not just about the positive path, the happy path, but those unanticipated paths.
Yeah, check out the OWASP list. They have some interesting possible examples under that business logic risk. Something to do with like price gouging and affecting like ticket price markets for an airline example, I think. Yeah. And then going back and purchasing it at a different price. Totally all like non-vulnerability related. It's just you're taking advantage of something that's hidden in the business logic. For nefarious deeds. It's a funny world. You also mentioned, Dan, like there's so much low-hanging fruit out there in terms of just broken access out there. But what are like the high-profile, like really business-critical risks that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, the low-hanging fruit, I mean, you'd be surprised how many breaches are from no authentication. I'm not even talking about like bad authentication, right, or weak. I'm talking about none. Like the door is left unlocked. So that's the low-hanging fruit. The high-hanging fruit, right, probably where the real money is in the logic. It's in the business logic, right? So, yeah, we've seen examples. I'll talk about it in my session this afternoon where people can transact on things they don't even own, right? Because they were able to exploit logic or take over people's accounts that don't belong to them by manipulating business logic. So that's probably the hardest, right? And so you talk about testing, it's critical, right? And we need to like automate as much of the stuff that can be automated, so we free up our security teams or engineers to think about those more nuanced scenarios that can't really be automated. And so, but yeah, we're just not doing nearly enough testing to make sure we're uncovering these types of flaws before they get to production.
Jacob, Anders, any ideas on business critical gaps we should be looking at?
Yeah, definitely. So related to what you said here on like no authentication, or there's of course like insecure configurations or misconfigurations, which is kind of another aspect of authorization, even if it might not be like directly related to API security, but still, like, just most of us are probably not gonna be facing like hackers or breaches of that kind, but we're probably, all of us are gonna do mistakes, and that accidentally doing something that might have like internal documents pushed to a public S3 bucket or something like that. And why was there a public S3 bucket in the first place? And that was allowed to happen. It's also like that's authorization too, that we protect our internal APIs and our internal resources, and that we set up and automate rules for how those are published and how those are audited. That is a huge part of this, and I think that is where we are what we're most likely to be exposed for, and I think probably all these horror stories about like taking down prod or whatnot, but it could just be like accidentally leaving something open, or so not having that kind of. Not having those guardrails around things like infrastructure or your data is a huge risk.
Yeah, and some of that we can implement in policies that are enforced programmatically. I mean, all of us who ever use Google Drive, you know also how easy it is to, accidentally share something a bit too widely.
Right.
So we can have the sort of programmatic approach to it, but we also need a layer of governance and particularly auditing, like visibility of what resources do we have and how do we audit these? How do we know what's out there and what we're doing? I mean, more of these type of tools are showing up also, not just for APIs, but for all kinds of systems where you can, pull and check and control, which is, the basis. Some of you have probably done certifications like SOC 2 or ISO and things like that. And part of that is really about the control. Like, sure, you're saying you're doing this, here's the paperwork of how well you're developing your APIs and all of that. How do you know that you're doing that? And that's super hard. And then you try to build in mechanisms in your organization to like make sure it's checked somehow. And as much as possible that you can automate out of that using authorization mechanisms and so on. It's good, but all of it can't be automated.
Yep.
So.
I think you all hit on a good, more general point. Like, we need to take vigilance for internal misconfigurations. It's not just like public or partner-facing APIs that could potentially be breached. I know Curity and Nordic APIs, we talk a lot about zero trust architecture. Could you expand a little bit on that and its role with API security?
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty good idea. Yesterday I talked a little bit about the token-based architecture, which is about how each system relies on a token to provide access, each API. Zero trust takes that all the way. It says pretty much no system trusts another system. Like, you can't, just because you're inside the network doesn't mean you should have access. you also need the appropriate token to have access. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you're a system talking to another system, that needs to be approved. You need to have that token in order to do that. So you're kind of building these small fortresses, if you will, inside the fortress. And that's pretty effective because it allows you to do more. Like in the end of the day, it's architecture that can easily be expanded and easily be also exposed, parts of it, to the internet. It does provide a good layer in this onion of security. But of course, it's quite a journey to get there. There's quite a few mechanisms you need to put in place, and a lot of us are trying to do that, because just putting the firewall around everything and routing it correctly,
right?
Yeah, you're going to misconfigure that at some point. Yeah. So it's something to add there.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's, I think, one challenge of doing like security everywhere is also that it's often quite annoying to work with. When everything is locked down. So there's like one challenge of doing security right is like how do you combine that with a good developer experience, and how do you work with this like every day? Do we need to obtain one token in one system and copy paste it into another in order to do this or that and so on? So just as important as we design like secure systems is that we make it convenient to work with a high grade of security. Because if we don't, it's very easy that we we take shortcuts, and we say like, okay, let's disable this on our internal network, because it's why should we have? It's just our internal network, and then like that. Then we're not working with the system as it looks in production or so on. So we're not really kind of exercising that. So and I think that's something I have learned the last few years in particular. Like if you build something really secure, you need to also from the start think about like how do we use this? Because if it's really hard to use, and then people are just going to think like this is annoying, it's not very fun, and people are either not going to use it, or they're going to start taking these shortcuts, which is an even bigger risk.
It's rough, right? Because we're talking often about self-service, great developer experience, and then at the same time we kind of need to balance usability with security. So how do we compare the two? How do we make a great usable API that is secure at the same time without sacrificing too much developer experience? Maybe it's the question of our time, but any other thoughts?
I don't think there's one answer to that, right? Like, I was reading about a situation last week in India. You know those QR codes that you scan at the restaurant to order food and so forth, right? Well, there's a company that provides that service, right? And there's an API for that, and of course this API hacker had to poke around and play with it, and they realized, of course, it's unauthenticated, and they started sending French fries to different, people's tables, because all they had to do was just change the table ID, and it worked, And all these, people got very confused. But are you supposed to add security to that? Like, do we want two-factor on the table, right? So, like, you have to tailor the security to the use case, right? And I mean, this is my first Nordic APIs was last year, and I was amazed by the authentication and authorization talks in the room were always full. It's so complicated, right? And I don't think there's yet like this is what you do it, you're good.
Jacob, any?
Yeah, no, I agree fully. It's a fine line, but I think what we can do is we can rely on the standards, obviously, and not just because they're vetted, but also typically it gives us tooling, because more people are doing it, more people are using the same mechanism as us, and there could be good libraries, and if they're not, you could be writing the good library, and others could contribute and review that. I think that's part also of what to do, but sometimes it's a really hard decision on security versus usability, for sure.
Let's keep coming back to that outside of the conference. I think that's an important topic. I did want to open the floor a little bit just so I'm not the only one asking all the questions here. Would anyone like to contribute any thoughts, any questions for our panelists up here?
Over there.
We have someone. Oh, we got Chris. Hey.
So this panel's specifically authorization, so I want to ask an authorization question. In the context of OAuth, do rich authorization requests really solve the fine-grained authorization problem? And sub-question, how do you relate the content of a rich authorization request to a regular human being who needs to understand what they're permitting access to?
I can start. Maybe you should fill in. Well, OAuth in itself is confusingly, thought of as the open authorization protocol. But OAuth is really about a delegation. Like the OAuth server, when you're asking it for a token, you're kind of asking it, can I get a token so that I can access this thing? But it doesn't mean that you will get access in the end, because authorization is done in the end. That's where you can do super fine-grained authorization. And you can do parts of authorization in between. I mean, the OAuth server can do coarse-grained. You can say, no chance, because you're not even part of this organization, so you better not even try. But it's not going to know, like, is it your account? Is it these type of things? So that detail, we can populate the token with a lot of details so that the decision is easy to make, but you still have to make it here. So OAuth is not really doing authorization in that sense. It's doing delegation. It's kind of like if I go to, if my boss tells me, you need to go and withdraw money from our company account at the bank. Here's a paper, I signed it, so you can take that, go to the bank. And I go to the bank and tell them I should withdraw money. Here's a signed paper from my boss. The bank says, no, you're not going to get that money because we don't have in our ledgers that you're the delegated person that we're going to allow to withdraw money for your company. That's delegation. And what they did in the end was authorization. They checked. So my boss could delegate as much as they want. So that's the first part. And the RAR part is perhaps a bit more intricate. I don't know if we should take it offbound. We could give it a try. But something on the first part from you guys first?
Oh. Not for me. It's way too complicated for me.
No, it's funny. Like OAuth, it's ironic as a standard that it says the OAuth authorization framework. That's like the title, and it's not really about authorization. It's all about tokens, and it doesn't say what a token is. So it's like there's a lot of interesting aspects to that. But I think for the topic of like fine-grained authorization, a token is just a data source, really. It's just and a good data source because it's been verified by some known or trusted issuer. So it's one input source for an authorization decision, but there could be any number of input sources. Like even if we know your identity. We might need more information, like are you on call, or are you on duty, or are you on vacation? And you should be allowed to, since you're a doctor, like you can view these medical records, but only medical records for one of your patients, not just any medical records and so on. So for fine-grained authorization, like that, the identity is often just one of many required data sources.
There's a lot of context that goes into making those decisions.
Yeah. I don't remember the second question anymore, but...
Anything else we didn't cover?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that with rich authorization requests, there's a lot of detail about the context of the delegation that's actually been permitted to the end user. But the end user has a problem. They're not a technician. We've already said security is complicated. So the question is, how, in your opinion, do you think we can make that authorization decision or delegation decision more relatable to a human being that's actually saying, I want to authorize access to this, and I know exactly what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how it relates to what's going to happen next?
Yeah. So rich authorization requests, for those of you who don't know, is a new thing in OAuth that kind of is a sibling to what we use as scopes today. So it kind of describes the permissions you're seeking when you're making an OAuth request, but they're broader. It's a JSON object. They're free form, which means you have a type and then everything else is up to whatever that type says it should be, which I think makes that problem extremely hard. Like, how do you take this freeform thing and know what to ask the user about? Because involving the user in these type of scenarios can be super important, especially in things like open banking and other things where you're kind of taking one application and giving it access to another organization's APIs. You want to involve the user, and you want to make sure the user really understands this. And that's, I mean, yeah, we need a few, psychologists to help us and, understand what do you ask a user? How do you tell that to a user? I don't have an answer. Maybe you do. No.
Seems like we have another question over here.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question actually related to offboarding. So I'd just like to know if you guys have like some examples of some security issues related to that. So to be a little bit more specific, it's you authorize people, right? They have access. They can have the resources. But then at some point, the partner or the external is no longer working with the organization. Yeah. But sometimes the business units don't necessarily do the job of letting us know. So just to know if you do have like some examples of where it went wrong.
Or examples? I don't know. Do you guys have any examples of that?
No, I have some personal experience, like coming back to a job where I had left 2 years earlier, and I was surprised to see like my mailbox was still there, and I had received all these mails for the last 2 years, so I had quite a backlog of emails. But I'm not sure if there's like other than, again, automating everything, like automate onboarding, automate offboarding. If it's even if it's like just to start off, like just a checklist. But anything, like as long as it's not like we'll figure it out when we get there, but it needs to follow some kind of procedure. But ideally, of course, offboarding and like should just be automated.
Yeah, but it's often overlooked, I think, the offboarding piece. Like you think of the main accounts and the main things, but you could have these long-lived sessions with refresh tokens and other things out there already. I know at Curity we've set up, so that when you refresh, you actually, if you have accounts, you can actually check that and make sure are they active still? Should we do this? Should we allow you to get another access token at any given time? Because of that, because it's super easy to overlook those type of things.
Some people might be thinking, why don't we just rotate the API keys? But why is it more complicated than that?
You mentioned the word.
I had to.
Yeah, who wants to start?
Who wants?
No, rotating API keys?
Yeah.
You're asking the least technical guy here.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, maybe we could start over here. I mean, you kind of have a philosophy on why it's insufficient to begin with.
I mean, I don't think it's a secret that we're not big proponents of API keys in general, because they're not really security. They're an identifier you send with your request, but it's also shared with every request, so anyone who ever sees that is going to be able to pick it up. So I mean, if you rotate that every 5 minutes and you issue it using a very nice flow with security in mind, well, you might as well use OAuth, because that's what that does. And then you have tokens instead. So API keys, despite the name, they're not really doing much security. They're not really keys like that. They're identifiers that we pass along, like a username almost.
Yeah. But of course, like sometimes you just have to work with what you're dealt. Like if you bought a product and like what you get is an API key, then by all means, like do rotate that key if somebody leaves who used to have access or so.
Right.
But again, like follow a protocol. Like no, don't try and improvise.
Or have a protocol to begin with.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, great. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists for joining us upstage.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.